The Wheel of the Year is a series of 8 festivals that are celebrated by many pagans and witches across the world. And yet there are many people who find that these celebrations simply don't work for them, they don't make sense for where they live, or they don't resonate with them. And so today I wanted to share some of the reasons why the Wheel of the Year celebrations might not work for you, and some of the ways that you can adapt them if they don't work at the minute, but you'd really like them to. The Wheel of the Year is a focal point within many neo-pagan traditions and religions, with many witches also choosing to celebrate the 8 Sabbaths that make up the Wheel of the Year. Now it's referred to as a wheel because the cycles of the seasons are ever rotating, and the 8 Sabbaths that make up the Wheel of the Year are equidistant, and so we can draw them as 8 spokes upon the Wheel of the Year. Now the 8 Sabbaths that make up the Wheel of the Year go as follows: Samhain, Yule, Imbolg, Ostara, Beltane, Letha, Lammas/Lunasa, Mabon, and then we're back to Samhain again, and it is an ever-repeating cycle. Now, despite what many people would assume, the Sabbats as we see them today are a modern creation. Yes, they're based off pre-existing celebrations and traditions. They're drawn from many different locations and time periods. But when we see them as a series of 8 celebrations that are all celebrated together, that is a very new addition, primarily the work of Gerald Gardner, the creator of modern Wicca as we see it today. Now, due to this, the celebrations have been adapted and altered from their origins. Some of their names have been completely changed to make it fit within the rest of the wheel, and some practitioners find it really hard to adapt it into their practice. The 8 Sabbats can be broken into 2 sets of 4. We have the quarter days. These are those that are related to the solstices. So they are the solstices and the equinoxes. To start with, we have the summer solstice, also known as Letha. This falls at the end of June. You then have the winter solstice, also known as Yule, which falls at the end of December. And between these 2 dates, equidistant to them on either side of the wheel, we have the equinoxes. The spring equinox, Ostara, and the autumn equinox, Mabon. These celebrations are very specific in date. They will typically always fall between the 20th and the 23rd of the month, and they are based off your location. So the summer and winter solstices are based off the longest and shortest days of the year, and that's very, very regional specific. So it's going to be different in the northern hemisphere than it is in the southern hemisphere. The other 4 Sabbats are known as the cross-quarter days. I've heard them also known as the Celtic fire festivals, these being Imbolg, Beltane, Lammas/Lunasa, and Samhain. These festivals are, as you might expect, primarily based off pre-existing celebrations found within Celtic regions. So again, we're seeing quite a localized series of traditions. Now, the wheel in general is based off the seasons of a particular location. We have many harvest festivals, 3 of them in fact. You have Lammas/Lunasa, Mabon, and Samhain. You also have many festivals that celebrate the coming of spring and the shifting of the seasons, including Imbolg, Ostara, and Beltane. And if you live in a location where the seasons fall outside of this, it can get really, really muddled and confusing. Typically, the 2 versions of issues that I see the most is that the celebrations don't align with the seasons of the location that you live, or you live in the southern hemisphere and you're a little confused about when you're meant to celebrate and what you're meant to celebrate. So to start with, let's talk about the seasons themselves. Because the seasonal celebrations, especially the cross-quarter days, are based off timing within the natural world, you can shift them to suit what you need. So if you live in Alaska, for instance, your spring is going to come at a very different point than it is in England. And if you live on the southern tip of Italy, that's going to be different again. Because they're based off seasonal shifts, you can adapt them as you see appropriate, but you might find that other people are not going to work with them at the same point as you will. Even in the British Isles we're seeing this. I adapt my celebrations to match the environment that I'm working in, because even here the celebrations don't always align with the weather. This year is a great example of that. The entire year seems to have been delayed and shifted, and so I've delayed and shifted my celebrations in accordance to that. I will typically celebrate the Sabbath as a season, and you'll often hear me referring to it as a Sabbath season for this reason. Not everyone is going to feel like they can celebrate on a very specific date. And especially for the cross-quarter days, you don't have to worry too much about the date. I will get into the specifics in a minute though. So a lot of them, for instance, Beltane or Imbolg, I will celebrate more as a shifting season, because every year the shift in the energy within the natural world is going to be different. So if you're finding that you're meant to celebrate Imbolg on the 1st of February and it just doesn't feel like Imbolg to you, you can delay it as you see appropriate and work with the energy of the season as a fuel for your workings. The only real exception that I can find to this would be Samhain, which falls on the 31st of October. Many will know it as Halloween. This date is often very specifically celebrated by a lot of pagans and witches. You might choose to do it differently depending on how you choose to celebrate. If you're focusing more on the harvest festival aspect of it, then you can shift that date accordingly. If you do want to work with the spirit aspect of it, you might want to stick specifically with Samhain or the 31st of October. Now, with this being said, I think it's important to say that the Sabbats, as well as all aspects of our practice, can be adapted and shifted. Unless you are part of a very specific tradition or religion that has exceptionally specific rules and dates, you can be flexible with it. If you're looking outside on Beltane morning and you're thinking, damn, it feels like March, and you don't really feel like celebrating the abundance and fertility of the natural world, you don't really see the flowers that are meant to be outside, then you might want to delay that celebration by a week or two so that you can celebrate it when it feels appropriate to celebrate it. And especially as the world and the environment is ever shifting and changing, historical dates for celebrations aren't going to make much sense in 50 or 100 years. Things are going to have to shift and adapt. So if you feel like you want to play around with the dates to see if you can get it to work, then feel free to do that. Now that is rather specifically for the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you might want to change the dates a lot more dramatically. And that's because the quarter days, these being the solar dates, the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the spring and autumn equinoxes, are very specifically based off the environment and the solar energy of that time. Now, a little bit like how water in a plug hole goes in a different direction in the Northern Hemisphere as it does in the Southern Hemisphere, you will find that the dates are different in the two different hemispheres. So while in the Northern Hemisphere we're experiencing the longest day and the shortest night, in the Southern Hemisphere, you're celebrating the longest night and the shortest day. Your wheel is turned by 6 months. So while we would be celebrating the summer solstice, you would be celebrating the winter solstice. While we would be celebrating Samhain, you would be celebrating Beltane. The entire wheel is essentially rotated by 180 degrees. And this can be kind of confusing if you aren't used to doing it, especially if you're seeing a lot of Northern Hemisphere creators posting about their Beltane altar. You have to remember that your celebrations are going to be shifted to suit the seasons where you are. And that is another thing that can become a bit of an issue for a lot of people, actually. While in the UK, we have 4 seasons, that doesn't apply everywhere. And so the Sabbats are built around seasonal shifts, and they are based around the fact that we have a spring, a summer, an autumn, and a winter. Even though sometimes it doesn't feel like we have a summer, sometimes we just kind of skip straight to autumn. We do have 4 rather distinct, if slightly blended, seasons. Other countries and other locations don't have that. They might have a monsoon season, which gets added in. They might only have a wet season and a dry season. Some locations have 6 seasons, others don't have seasons at all, and that can make it incredibly difficult as well. And so many practitioners, if they live in a region where the Sabbats simply don't make sense for them, will just not celebrate them. And that's an option too. You don't have to celebrate them if you don't feel connected to them or if they simply don't work for you. Now, the other big reason why people don't work with the Sabbats or they don't connect with them is because they don't resonate with them, and that's okay. A lot of people do come at witchcraft and come at paganism and neo-pagan traditions with the belief that the Wheel of the Year, as well as many other things such as the Wiccan Rede and the Rule of 3, are applicable always to everyone. And they really aren't. It's something that you can choose to add into your practice if you resonate with it, and unless you're part of a tradition that specifically calls upon it, you don't need to include it. Now, within my own practice, I work with the Wheel of the Year, and I'm fortunate that I live in a location where the Sabbats really do make sense for the seasons. I'll be honest, sometimes they don't. I do have to tweak and adapt them, but given that most of the Sabbats come from Celtic regions or Germanic and Scandinavian regions, it does line up for me, and I'm very fortunate in that regard. I also came at this practice from a Wiccan standpoint. They were the first books that I purchased, they were the first people that I spoke to and that I learned from, and so for me, that Wiccan background is very much ingrained into my celebrations and my Sabbat work, and that isn't going to apply for everyone. There are people out there who follow folk practices, who follow belief systems and traditions that are completely different and work with different celebrations or no celebrations at all. You find that there are many Christian witches who will instead work with the Christian festivals, many of which have been adapted from pre-existing traditions, such as Candlemas falls on the exact same date as Imbolg. I wonder why. Ostara and Easter are also incredibly similar. The harvest festivals also pretty much line up with the pre-existing pagan harvest festivals. And while the names of the Sabbats might have changed, many traditions will have similar festivals at similar times. And that's something you might want to look into. If the Sabbats don't resonate with you because you don't like the fact that they are reclaimed, because these traditions are not celebrated in the exact same way that they always have been. They've been adapted and shifted, changed to suit agendas and to suit time periods. They've been squished into the wheel of the year to make them nice and cohesive, but they wouldn't have always been that way, and so some people don't like the fact that the traditions have been reclaimed. Some people will instead want to work with the pre-existing traditions. They might want to dive into the history. They might be focused on maybe a couple of 100 years ago. In some cases, these celebrations go back to Neolithic times, and they might want to be drawing on something much older. For other people, they may find that not all of the celebrations resonate with their specific path. If you follow a specific tradition that is based in the land and the local area, celebrating the Celtic fire festivals might not apply, and so instead you might want to draw on celebrations and traditions that take place in your local area. I think the one problem that a lot of people have with Wicca as a whole, and with the Wheel of the Year specifically for the purpose of this video, is that it has a tendency to monopolize all seasonal celebrations. Everything just kind of gets masked by and under the Wheel of the Year, when in reality, most regions, traditions, and locations will have their own seasonal festivals, many of which are being forgotten or lost to time. So you might find that if you live in Italy, for instance, there are seasonal celebrations that you might prefer to work with to connect deeper with your location or cultural heritage, and also to stop these celebrations from dying out. If you are of a particular tradition or culture, you might find that there are very specific cultural celebrations that you might prefer to draw on in your magical practice to keep that alive within your culture and also within your own magical system. You might also find that celebrating these big festivals all of the time just isn't for you. While today we might celebrate all 8 spokes of the Wheel of the Year together, that wasn't always the case. People would perhaps have only followed a few of them. If we look at Stonehenge as an example, it's popular during the summer solstice and the winter solstice because that's when it makes sense. That's more likely than not when it would have been used because that's when the sun almost perfectly lines up, taking a few thousand years in movement and shifts into account. I wouldn't necessarily say that Stonehenge would have been used to celebrate Imbolg, for instance. Sure, it might have been used for in-between seasonal celebrations, but it doesn't seem to fit like the summer and winter solstice do. And so it's likely that the historical traditions weren't celebrated all together, and so you might not want to either. I often find, especially in my comments, that there are people saying that they forgot a Sabbat or they simply don't work with a particular Sabbat. Maybe Imbolg is something that they keep forgetting about, or maybe Mabon is just something that they don't connect with. And you might find that your seasonal celebrations start reducing down over time. You might start celebrating them all and then realize that maybe you only need 4 of them. Maybe you really do just want to work with the cross-quarter days, or maybe the solstices are the only times you really feel drawn to celebrate, and you can adapt that into your practice as well. Don't feel the need to put yourself into a box and have to celebrate all of them. Even I don't celebrate all of them all of the time. Anyone who's been on my channel this year will notice that some of the Sabbath celebrations have just been missing, and that's because life just got in the way. I'm not always available to be setting up an altar or to do loads of workings. and that's fine too. I feel like this entire video is just me reiterating that you can be flexible in your own practice, but I think it's really, really important for me to say it because a lot of people come at witchcraft and they come at neo-pagan religions and traditions and they think that they have to celebrate it by the book, and that if they don't, they're a bad practitioner or they're a bad follower of that tradition, and you're just not. It's never as simple as saying that everyone celebrates everything all of the time, because it just isn't true. If you feel the need to adapt and shift, you can do that, and if you don't want to work with any of the Sabbaths, you don't have to. And I know that there's people out there who feel quite isolated because they don't celebrate the Sabbaths and they feel like they're doing something wrong. You're not doing something wrong for following your path and for going with what you feel is right. And I feel like fundamentally that's basically what this video is all about. The Sabbaths have a very, very interesting history. Some of them have been completely renamed in a way that is not entirely applicable to much. For instance, Mabon was never historically called Mabon, and it likely ties it in with Welsh mythology and folklore in a way that it never was historically. When we start deep diving into the history of these celebrations, we start noticing that some of them are completely different to how we see them today, and you wouldn't necessarily resonate with them historically, or perhaps you're more likely to resonate with them historically than you are in its modern format. So if you feel the need, shift and change the Sabbaths, extend the seasons, turn the wheel, cut them out entirely if you don't feel like you're aiding your practice, and be authentic to you. Because if celebrating an Irish festival just doesn't resonate with you if you live in North America, if you live in Brazil, or you live in... I'm trying to think of countries really quickly, and you know when you need to think of something quickly and you can't think of anything? Yep, that's where I'm at right now. India, for instance. It's not necessarily going to align with your culture, your heritage, your location, your seasons, your interests. And that's really important to take into consideration. So if the Sabbaths aren't for you, that's okay. I would love to know how you adapt the Sabbaths, though, to fit your goals and the way you choose to celebrate. Everyone has a completely different way of doing it. Some people merge Sabbaths together. Some people will cut different ones out entirely. Other people will have a specific way that they shift the wheel. So, for instance, if you live in, say, Minnesota and your spring starts way later, you might find that turning the wheel by about 45 degrees could be a better fit than having it as it is. Now obviously that is going to throw off the summer and winter solstice, so you'd have to work that out, but let me know if you have any unusual ways that you adapt the Sabbaths to suit you and your practice. Now with that all being said, this was a very short video to me. I am not used to doing videos this small, but I felt like this was important to bring up. I hope that you did enjoy this video. Feel free to give it a like if you did. This is very much content that I used to make, like 2018 Hearthwitch. So let me know if you like the shorter, more educational style of content. I'd love to know. If you do have any questions, comments, concerns, video ideas, or just want to chit chat with the community, feel free to post it down in the comment section. And if you do enjoy the magical content on this channel or in this video, feel free to hit subscribe. I try to post magical content every single week. Whew. And with that being said, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you have a marvelous, magical day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!